"You saved us, Mom. I swear I'll never forget this." Those were the words my son Daniel whispered while crying in my kitchen the night I gave away everything I had left. At 72 years old, I wired $170,000 from my retirement account to clear his business debt because he said collectors were threatening to take the house and leave his children homeless. I still remember how his hands trembled while he held the coffee mug I'd bought him 20 years earlier at a roadside gift shop in Tennessee. My daughter-in-law Vanessa sat beside him in a cream-colored sweater, dabbing fake tears from the corners of her eyes while telling me I was the only person who could save their family. I should have noticed how quickly her tears stopped the moment I agreed. But when you're a mother, love has a way of blinding you to things other people would see immediately. My late husband Walter used to warn me about that. "You always give until there's nothing left for yourself," he once told me during one of our quiet evenings on the back porch. At the time, I thought he was exaggerating. Now I realize he was trying to prepare me for exactly this moment. The next morning, I drove to the bank under a gray November sky with my stomach tied in knots. The transfer emptied nearly everything Walter and I had spent 40 years building together. The retirement account, the emergency savings, even the certificate of deposit Walter insisted we never touch unless it was truly life or death. Daniel hugged me so tightly afterward that I could barely breathe. Vanessa even kissed my cheek and called me an angel. Then came the second request. "Mom," Daniel said carefully 3 weeks later while staring down at his plate during dinner, "the bank still won't refinance unless we show more collateral." I already knew what was coming before he finished speaking. Vanessa reached across the table and squeezed my hand gently. "We were thinking maybe you could transfer your house temporarily," she said softly, "just until we get back on our feet." Temporarily. That word destroyed my life more than any scream ever could. 2 months later, my name was no longer on the deed. To the house Walter built with his own hands 33 years earlier. Daniel promised nothing would change. Vanessa promised I would always have my own room. At first, everything felt normal. Vanessa cooked my favorite pot roast on Sundays. Daniel hugged me every morning before work. The grandchildren still sat beside me during movie nights. But slowly, little things began disappearing. Family photos were replaced with new portraits that didn't include me. Dinner conversations stopped whenever I entered the room. One evening, I walked upstairs and realized they had changed the Wi-Fi password without telling me. Another morning, I found all my winter coats packed into cardboard boxes labeled storage. Still, I kept telling myself I was imagining things. Until the night, I overheard Vanessa laughing on the patio with her sister. "Honestly," she whispered, "once Evelyn's savings are gone, we can finally move her somewhere cheaper." And then both women laughed while I stood frozen behind the kitchen door, holding a basket of laundry in my shaking hands. For several seconds, I could not move. I just stood there in the dark hallway listening to Vanessa laugh about me like I was some outdated piece of furniture they were waiting to throw away. The worst part was not even what she said. It was how casually she said it. Like my entire life had become an inconvenience to manage. I quietly carried the laundry basket back downstairs and sat on the narrow bed in the storage room they now called my bedroom. The small space smelled faintly of paint thinner and cardboard because Daniel kept old renovation supplies stacked against one wall. A single lamp sat beside the bed, casting yellow light across the room Walter would have called a prison cell. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Vanessa laughing again. The next morning, I still made pancakes for the grandchildren because old habits are hard to break. Emma hugged me before school and whispered that she liked my pancakes better than her mother's cooking. Vanessa immediately corrected her. "That is rude, sweetheart," she said sharply while scrolling through her phone. "Your grandmother does not live here to play housekeeper." I looked down at the stove while the silence spread across the kitchen. Daniel never said a word. Later that afternoon, I noticed movers carrying my antique dining chairs out through the garage. Walter built those chairs by hand during the winter after Daniel graduated high school. I rushed outside in my sweater despite the cold wind biting through the neighborhood. "What are they doing with those?" I asked. Vanessa did not even look up from her iced coffee. "Oh, those old things. I sold them online this morning. They did not match the new interior design." I stared at her. "Walter made those." She shrugged lightly. "Well, now somebody else can enjoy them." I wanted to scream. I wanted to remind her that every brick in that house existed because Walter and I sacrificed vacations, birthdays, and weekends for decades. Instead, I just nodded slowly because something inside me had begun changing. The hurt was still there, but underneath it, another feeling was growing. Clarity. That evening, Daniel came downstairs while I was folding towels. He leaned awkwardly against the doorway like a teenager preparing to ask for money again. "Mom," he said carefully, "Vanessa thinks it might be easier if we convert this room into a small studio apartment for you." I looked around the cramped storage space. "This already is a storage room." He forced a laugh. "Just temporarily. We are trying to make things work financially." Financially? I almost laughed myself. I had given them nearly everything I owned, yet somehow I was still the burden. After he left, I opened the old cedar chest beside my bed where I kept Walter's things. His watch, his reading glasses, the folded handwritten birthday card he gave me 3 months before he died. As I moved the card aside, something slipped from beneath the stack of papers and landed softly on the floor. It was an envelope with my name written across the front in Walter's careful handwriting. My heart immediately started pounding. I had never seen it before. Slowly, I opened the seal and unfolded the letter inside. The first sentence made the air leave my lungs. "Evelyn, if you are reading this, it means somebody you trusted has finally shown you who they really are." My hands trembled so badly that the letter rattled against the paper envelope while I kept reading Walter's words under the dim light beside my bed. "I pray I am wrong," he wrote. "But if Daniel ever lets somebody come between him and his conscience, there are things you need to know immediately." I sat perfectly still, hearing nothing except the ticking of the old clock near the furnace room. Walter went on to explain that 6 years earlier, after Vanessa convinced Daniel to leave his stable engineering job and invest in risky real estate deals, Walter quietly met with an attorney and created a family trust designed to protect me if financial problems ever spiraled out of control. My chest tightened as I kept reading. The trust had one condition Walter specifically underlined by hand. If I was ever pressured, manipulated, or removed from my own home against my wishes, the ownership structure of the property could legally reverse. I reread that sentence 4 times because my mind could barely process it. The house had never fully belonged to Daniel at all. Walter had protected me without ever telling anyone. Tears filled my eyes, but for the first time in months, they were not tears of helplessness. They were tears of realization. Walter knew. Somehow, years before his death, he saw something I refused to see. The next morning, I folded the letter carefully into my purse before going upstairs. Vanessa was sitting at the kitchen island drinking a green smoothie while scrolling through furniture websites on her tablet. She barely glanced at me. "Good morning," I said quietly. "Morning," she replied flatly. "By the way, the contractor is coming Friday to discuss knocking out the downstairs wall. We will need your boxes moved somewhere else." "Your boxes, not your belongings, not your memories, just boxes." Daniel entered moments later adjusting his tie while carrying his travel coffee mug. He looked exhausted lately, the kind of exhausted that comes from avoiding reality every single day. "Mom," he said, kissing my cheek quickly. "Vanessa mentioned maybe finding you a senior community closer to downtown, somewhere with activities." I stared at him across the kitchen counter. "Are you asking me to leave?" He immediately looked uncomfortable. No, not leave. Just maybe somewhere that fits your lifestyle better." My lifestyle. I almost smiled at how carefully he tried to avoid the truth. Before I could answer, Emma ran downstairs holding her backpack. "Grandma, are you still coming to my choir concert Friday?" she asked excitedly. Vanessa answered before I could speak. "Your grandmother probably needs to rest this weekend." Emma frowned. "But she promised." Vanessa sighed dramatically. "Emma, please do not argue first thing in the morning." I watched my granddaughter's face fall, while Daniel stared into his coffee like he wished he were somewhere else entirely. That afternoon, after everyone left, I drove 20 miles across town to the office address Walter had written at the bottom of his letter. Harrison and Cole Legal Group occupied the 3rd floor of an older brick building downtown near the courthouse. When the receptionist asked my name, her expression immediately changed. "Mrs. Carter," she said softly, "Mr. Harrison has been expecting you for a very long time." Those words sent a chill through my entire body. 10 minutes later, an older attorney with silver hair closed his office door behind me and placed a thick file folder on the desk. Then he looked me directly in the eyes and said something that changed everything. "Mrs. Carter," he said carefully, Your husband was terrified that one day you would give away your entire life to people who would never truly value it. The attorney opened the thick folder slowly, almost carefully, like he understood that every page inside carried the weight of my entire marriage. Walter came to see me 3 times during the last year of his life, Mr. Harrison explained while adjusting his glasses. At first, he only wanted a standard estate plan. But later, he became concerned about your financial safety. I could barely speak. Concerned about Daniel? Mr. Harrison paused before answering. Concerned about influence. That single word settled heavily between us. He slid several documents across the desk toward me. The legal language was overwhelming at first, but he patiently explained everything piece by piece. Walter had transferred the house into a protected family trust years earlier. Daniel had partial usage rights, but the ownership itself remained conditional. If I was ever pressured into surrendering my residence, isolated financially, or intentionally displaced from the home, the trust automatically triggered a legal review process. My stomach tightened. Walter had planned for exactly what was happening now. Why did he not tell me? I whispered. Mr. Harrison gave me a sad smile. Because he knew you would never believe your own son could hurt you. Tears burned my eyes again, but this time anger mixed with the grief. Not loud anger. Not screaming anger. The kind that settles deep in your chest and quietly changes who you are. Mr. Harrison opened another section of the file. There is more, he said carefully. He explained that several financial transfers connected to the property required both my informed consent and documented legal disclosure. If anyone manipulated or pressured me into signing under misleading circumstances, the trust allowed legal intervention. Suddenly, memories started replaying in my mind differently. Vanessa rushing paperwork in front of me while dinner cooked in the background. Daniel saying, "It is just temporary, Mom." The way they avoided eye contact while I signed document after document at the kitchen table. I felt sick realizing how easily I had trusted them. Mr. Harrison studied my face quietly before asking, "Mrs. Carter, did anybody fully explain the transfer agreements to you before you signed?" I looked down at my hands. "No," I admitted softly. "I just believed my son." Silence filled the office for a moment. Then Mr. Harrison leaned forward slightly. "Walter also instructed me not to act unless you came here voluntarily. He wanted any decision to remain entirely yours." That sentence stayed with me long after I left the office later that afternoon. Entirely yours. I had not heard words like that in a very long time. By the time I drove back to the house, the sky had already turned dark. Christmas lights glowed across the neighborhood, while soft music drifted from nearby homes. Families preparing for the holidays. Families eating dinner together. Families who probably still believed love meant safety. Inside the house, Vanessa stood in the living room directing movers who were carrying out Walter's old leather recliner. The same chair where he used to fall asleep watching baseball every Sunday afternoon. "What is happening?" I asked quietly. Vanessa looked annoyed that I interrupted her. "The new sectional arrives tomorrow morning," she replied. There was no room for outdated furniture. Outdated. That word hit harder than she realized. Daniel appeared from the kitchen, holding his phone. "Mom, we were going to tell you," he said quickly. "The old furniture just does not fit the new layout." I stared at both of them standing there in the house Walter built, surrounded by pieces of our life disappearing one by one. Then I noticed something else. Near the front door sat 3 large storage bins labeled in black marker with my name across the side. Evelyn. Not Mom. Not Grandma. Just Evelyn. Like I had already become somebody temporary inside my own family. That night, I sat alone in the storage room staring at the 3 bins by the front door through the crack beneath my doorframe. Every few minutes, I heard Vanessa moving around upstairs, laughing softly while holiday music played through the house speakers. It sounded like the kind of warm Christmas evening families are supposed to cherish together. But downstairs, wrapped in an old cardigan with the smell of dust and cardboard around me, I finally understood something painful. They were already building a new life inside that house, and in their version of the future, I did not exist. Around 9 o'clock, there was a quiet knock at my door. Before I could answer, Emma slipped inside carrying a paper plate with 2 sugar cookies and a small mug of hot chocolate topped with melting marshmallows. "Mom said you probably were not hungry," she whispered while setting the plate beside me. "But I know you skipped dinner." My throat tightened instantly. Emma looked so much like Daniel when he was her age that sometimes It physically hurt to look at her. Same blue eyes. Same nervous habit of twisting her sleeves when something felt wrong. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said softly. She sat beside me on the edge of the bed and glanced around the cramped room. "Grandma," she whispered carefully. "Are you leaving?" I forced a smile I did not feel. "Why would you ask that?" Emma looked down at her hands. "I heard Mom talking on the phone earlier. She said once the holidays are over, the house will finally feel peaceful again." For a moment, I could not speak at all. Not because the words shocked me anymore, but because hearing them through the voice of a child somehow made them crueler. Emma suddenly looked panicked. "Please do not tell Mom I told you," she said quickly. "She gets really mad when people overhear things." I gently squeezed her hand. "I would never do that." She leaned against my shoulder for a moment, and I closed my eyes remembering all the nights I held Daniel the same way after nightmares when he was little. Back then, he used to tell me I was the safest place in the world. Funny how time changes people. After Emma went upstairs, I opened Walter's letter again and reread every line slowly. Near the bottom of the second page, another name was written beneath Mr. Harrison's office number. Diane Mercer. Underneath it, Walter had written one sentence. "If you ever feel completely alone, call her." The next afternoon, while Daniel and Vanessa attended some charity luncheon downtown, I drove to a small cafe near the riverfront where Diane agreed to meet me. The moment I saw her walk through the door, I recognized her from Walter's retirement party years earlier. She had kind eyes and silver hair cut neatly above her shoulders. The moment she sat down across from me, she reached for my hand immediately. "Walter worried about you constantly toward the end," she admitted gently. "Not because he thought you were weak. Because he knew your heart would always choose forgiveness over protection." I stared down at my untouched coffee. "I feel foolish," I admitted quietly. Diane shook her head. "No, Evelyn. You feel betrayed. Those are not the same thing." Tears stung my eyes. Again, I was growing tired of crying, but grief has strange ways of leaking out when you least expect it. Diane leaned closer across the table. "Walter also told me something else," she said carefully. "If Daniel ever allowed Vanessa to push you out of your own home, it meant he was already in deeper financial trouble than he admitted." My stomach dropped instantly. "What do you mean?" Diane hesitated before answering. "I mean your sacrifice may not have saved them at all." Diane's words stayed with me the entire drive home. "Your sacrifice may not have saved them at all." I repeated that sentence over and over in my mind while Christmas lights blurred past my windshield through the cold December rain. For months, I had convinced myself that everything happening inside that house was simply stress from financial hardship. I told myself people acted differently under pressure, that once Daniel recovered financially, he would become my son again. But now another possibility had begun quietly forming in my chest, one far more frightening. What if the debt was never truly the problem? When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed two unfamiliar luxury SUVs parked outside the house. Through the front windows, I could see Vanessa entertaining guests with wine glasses and catered food spread across the kitchen island I paid for years ago. Laughter echoed through the living room, while soft jazz music drifted outside every time the front door opened. Nobody had mentioned a party to me. I entered quietly through the garage carrying grocery bags. The moment Vanessa saw me walk in, her smile tightened slightly. "Oh," she said with forced cheerfulness, "you are back early." Early, as though I were some visitor interrupting her evening. Several well-dressed couples stood nearby, discussing real estate investments and vacation properties. One woman glanced at me politely before asking Vanessa, "Is this your mother?" Vanessa laughed lightly while sipping wine. "My husband's mother," she corrected quickly. "She is staying with us for now." Staying with us. I nearly dropped the grocery bags right there in the kitchen. Daniel appeared moments later looking uncomfortable. "Mom, we thought you might want to relax downstairs tonight," he said quietly. "We are discussing business opportunities." Business opportunities. In the house I sacrificed everything to save. I nodded calmly and carried the groceries downstairs without another word. But halfway down the steps I stopped when I heard one of the men upstairs speaking. "Honestly, Daniel, if the lake property deal closes next quarter, you guys could double your equity within 18 months. My entire body froze. Lake property? Equity? This did not sound like a family drowning in debt anymore. Slowly, I stepped farther down the staircase and listened carefully through the open vent near the hallway. Vanessa's voice floated down first. "Once we finish renovating, The house value alone should increase by at least 300,000. Somebody whistled approvingly. Then Daniel laughed nervously and said something that made my blood run cold. We just had to make some temporary sacrifices to stabilize everything first. Temporary sacrifices. That was what they called my retirement savings, my home, and my entire future now. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed downstairs long after the party ended, staring at the concrete floor while realization slowly settled over me piece by piece. They were not struggling anymore. They were rebuilding, expanding, planning investments, hosting parties. And somehow, despite everything I had given them, I was still hidden downstairs like an embarrassing problem they hoped guests would ignore. Around midnight, I heard footsteps descending the stairs. Daniel appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie. For a moment, he almost looked like the son I remembered. Tired, guilty, human. "Mom," he said quietly, "I know things have been tense lately, but Vanessa and I are doing our best." I looked at him carefully in the dim light. "Daniel," I asked softly, "are you still in financial trouble?" His eyes shifted away immediately. That single movement told me more than any answer ever could. Daniel never answered my question directly. Instead, he rubbed both hands across his face and sat down on the folding chair beside my bed like a man carrying a weight he could no longer hold upright. "Things are complicated right now," he finally muttered. Complicated. Another carefully chosen word that meant absolutely nothing. I studied my son quietly while the furnace hummed behind us. There were deeper lines around his eyes now, and more gray in his hair than I remembered just a year earlier. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him again. Almost. "Daniel," I said softly, "did you really need all the money I gave you?" His jaw tightened immediately. Of course we did, but he still would not look directly at me. Silence stretched between us until he suddenly stood up again. "Vanessa worries about appearances," he admitted quietly. "After the business losses, she did not want people thinking we were failing." I stared at him in disbelief. "So you pretended?" He sighed heavily. "Mom, you do not understand how things work now. Investors notice everything. Clients notice everything. If people think you are unstable financially, they disappear." I felt something inside me harden further. Walter used to say character reveals itself most clearly when people are afraid of losing status. Now I finally understood exactly what he meant. The next morning, I woke early and quietly made coffee before anyone else came upstairs. For the first time in months, I stopped behaving like a guest inside my own home. I sat at the kitchen table with Walter's letter folded neatly beside my coffee mug while soft snow fell outside the windows. Around 7 o'clock, Vanessa entered wearing silk workout clothes and immediately frowned when she saw me sitting there. "Oh," she said coolly, "you are up early." "I live here," I replied calmly. The words surprised even me. Vanessa paused briefly before forcing a smile. "Of course." But her tone changed instantly. A few minutes later, Emma rushed downstairs excited about her choir concert that evening. "Grandma promised she would come," she announced while grabbing cereal from the pantry. Vanessa opened the refrigerator without turning around. "We already talked about this," she said sharply. "Tonight is not really the right environment." Emma looked confused. "What does that mean?" Vanessa sighed dramatically. "It means your grandmother gets tired easily." Before I could stop myself, I spoke firmly. "I am perfectly capable of attending my granddaughter's concert." Vanessa slowly closed the refrigerator door and looked directly at me for the first time in weeks. There was no warmth left in her expression anymore. Only irritation. "Evelyn," she said carefully, "we are trying to maintain some structure in this house." Structure. Another polished word hiding something ugly underneath. Daniel entered midway through the tension and immediately sensed the atmosphere. "What is going on?" he asked. Vanessa folded her arms. "Your mother refuses to understand boundaries." I almost laughed at the absurdity of hearing that sentence inside the house Walter and I built from nothing. Daniel looked exhausted again. "Mom," he said quietly, "maybe it is better if you skip tonight. There will be a lot of families there, and Emma already has enough pressure." For several seconds, I simply stared at him. Then something unexpected happened. Emma slammed her cereal spoon down onto the counter, so hard milk splashed across the granite surface. "Why are you both acting like Grandma is embarrassing?" she shouted. The kitchen went completely silent. Vanessa's face darkened instantly. "Emma," she snapped, "go upstairs right now." But Emma did not move. Instead, tears filled her eyes while she looked directly at her father. Grandma gave us everything, she whispered. And now you act like you do not even want people to see her. The silence after Emma's outburst felt suffocating. Vanessa stood frozen beside the refrigerator, her face tight with anger she was trying desperately to hide in front of the children. Daniel looked completely caught off guard, like hearing the truth spoken aloud by his own daughter somehow made it impossible to keep pretending anymore. Emma's lower lip trembled slightly, but she refused to look away from either of her parents. Go upstairs, Vanessa repeated coldly. This time Emma obeyed, but not before glancing back at me with tears in her eyes. The moment her footsteps disappeared upstairs, Vanessa turned toward me sharply. This is exactly the kind of emotional manipulation I have been talking about, she snapped. I stared at her calmly. I did not say a word. You do not have to, she replied immediately. Children absorbed tension. Daniel rubbed his temples like he physically could not handle another second of conflict. Please, he muttered. Can we not do this right now? But something inside me had finally reached its limit. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like ice forming over water. No, I said softly. Both of them looked startled because I almost never challenged anything directly. I folded my hands carefully on the kitchen table before continuing. I think it is time we discuss what is actually happening in this house. Vanessa laughed once under her breath, short and dismissive. What exactly do you think is happening? I held her gaze steadily. I think you both expected me to disappear quietly after giving you everything you wanted. Daniel's face immediately drained of color. Vanessa crossed her arms. That is ridiculous. Is it? I asked calmly. Because I heard you discussing assisted living before you ever discussed it with me. Her eyes widened for half a second before hardening again. You were eavesdropping? The fact that she cared more about being overheard than what she actually said told me everything I needed to know. Daniel suddenly stood up from the table. Mom, nobody is trying to hurt you, he insisted. We are under pressure. Pressure does not erase decency. I replied quietly. The room fell silent again. Then Vanessa said something that finally shattered the last illusion I still carried about her. Evelyn, she said slowly, you need to understand that this house cannot revolve around your feelings forever. Forever. As though I had become some exhausting burden they had generously tolerated. I looked around the kitchen Walter designed himself 30 years earlier. The marble countertops I paid for after working double shifts at the hospital billing office. The chandelier we bought during our 25th anniversary trip to Charleston. Every corner of that house carried pieces of my life. Yet somehow I had become the outsider inside it. Daniel finally spoke again, but his voice sounded weak now. Vanessa does not mean it like that. She turned toward him instantly. Actually, I do. The honesty in her voice stunned even him. She took a slow breath before continuing. We cannot keep sacrificing our future because your mother refuses to move on with her life. I almost smiled at the irony of hearing the word sacrifice from the woman currently living off mine. Before I could answer, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. Vanessa frowned and checked her phone. Who is that? She muttered. Daniel walked to the front door while I remained seated at the kitchen table. A few seconds later, I heard his voice suddenly tighten with confusion. Mr. Harrison? My heart immediately began pounding. The attorney stepped calmly into the foyer holding a leather briefcase beneath his arm. Snow clung lightly to the shoulders of his dark coat. He removed his gloves slowly before speaking in a measured voice that instantly changed the atmosphere inside the entire house. Good evening, he said politely. I am here because there are several urgent legal matters regarding this property that need to be addressed immediately. The entire house went silent the moment Mr. Harrison stepped into the living room. Even Vanessa, who always seemed to have a sharp response ready for everything, looked visibly unsettled as the attorney calmly removed several documents from his briefcase and placed them on the dining table. Daniel stared at him in confusion. What is this about? He asked nervously. Mr. Harrison folded his hands carefully before answering. I am here on behalf of Mrs. Evelyn Carter regarding the family trust established by Walter Carter 6 years ago. Vanessa immediately stiffened beside the kitchen island. There must be some mistake, she said quickly. The house belongs to Daniel now. Mr. Harrison turned toward her politely. Actually, no, not entirely. I watched the color slowly drain from Daniel's face while Mr. Harrison opened the first document. The property transfer completed last year was conditional under the trust agreement. Ownership rights were dependent upon Mrs. Carter maintaining unrestricted residency, financial dignity, and informed consent regarding all major housing decisions. Vanessa let out a short laugh that sounded more anxious than confident. This is ridiculous. Evelyn lives here. Mr. Harrison nodded once. In a converted storage room without equal access to the primary residence, while her personal property was removed and sold. Daniel immediately looked toward me. Mom, you talked to him about all this. His voice sounded hurt, almost betrayed, which would have been ironic if it had not been so painful. I finally stood from the kitchen table slowly. I did not need to explain much, I said quietly. Your actions explained it for me. Vanessa stepped forward angrily. We took her in when she had nowhere else to go. That sentence hit the room like shattered glass. Even Daniel looked stunned, hearing it spoken out loud. My chest tightened, but this time I refused to let the pain silence me. Nowhere else to go. I repeated softly. Vanessa, I gave you this house. She crossed her arms defensively, and we appreciated it. But people cannot hold generosity over someone forever. Mr. Harrison calmly slid another paper across the table. Mrs. Carter's financial contribution exceeded $170,000 in direct transfers, along with significant property concessions. Under the trust review, those transfers are now under formal examination due to potential coercion and material misrepresentation. Daniel looked completely lost now. Wait, he said slowly. What does that mean? Mr. Harrison's voice remained calm and professional. It means the trust has frozen all pending property restructuring, refinancing, and equity transfers connected to this home until the investigation is complete. Vanessa's face immediately paled. You cannot do that. Actually, Mr. Harrison replied evenly. Walter Carter specifically designed the trust so we could. For several seconds, nobody spoke at all. Snow continued falling softly outside, while the Christmas tree lights reflected across the windows behind us. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, the house felt like decades of truth were finally breaking through every wall at once. Daniel slowly sat down at the table and stared at the paperwork like he no longer recognized his own life. Dad did this, he whispered. Mr. Harrison nodded. Your father loved your mother very much. He worried that one day her kindness would be mistaken for weakness. Vanessa suddenly grabbed Daniel's arm tightly. Say something, she snapped under her breath. But Daniel looked exhausted now, defeated, older somehow. His eyes slowly moved toward me for the first time all evening. Mom, he said quietly, I never wanted things to become like this. I looked at my son sitting beneath the chandelier Walter and I bought together 20 years earlier. For the first time in months, I no longer saw the frightened little boy I once protected from nightmares. I saw a grown man who stood silently while somebody else slowly erased his mother from her own life. And somehow, that truth hurt more than losing the house ever did.